Hey, what is good, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Now, in today's video, we're going to be continuing where we left off in the previous video, and that is we're going to be setting up our input system, right? So in the previous video, what we did was we essentially created an event system, and that event system essentially basically allows us to basically subscribe to events and then handle those events using callbacks, right? So, for those who don't really know what is going on, I'm just gonna give a little brief on how this event system currently works because there's a bug that I want to fix in this video just before we start off with the input system. So that specific bug will be related to what I'm about to say, right? So let me show you guys how the event system is essentially working in our engine, or will work in our engine, right? So, our engine allows us to essentially subscribe to an event, right? And then the subscriber, right, will then react to that event by basically calling a callback function, right? In this case, we're listening for an event that happens when a key is pressed, right? And then once a key is pressed, this subscriber will then receive that event as a key press and then basically handle it using this callback here. So it's going to call this callback, and this callback is basically just this function up here, right? Which essentially just prints out to the console that a key pressed has happened, and it just gives us the key code or the data that's basically being passed through with that event, right? So now if I run this, okay, and I just scroll down through the code here, you'll notice that we're basically subscribing to an event, which is an event on key pressed, right? And then we subscribing to another event, which is different, which is happening, which basically gets published when a mouse movement occurs. We're actually not basically publishing any of these events automatically. We're doing so manually down here. That's because we don't have an input system set up yet, which is what we're going to do in this video. However, these two functions, right, essentially are listening to events, and once those events get published, right, down here, they handle it by calling these callback functions, right? So we have one for the key pressed and then one for the mouse movement, right? However, right, these two subscribers are listening to two different events. What happens if we have another subscriber listening to the same event, right, belonging to a different subscriber? So let me just create a different subscriber here. Let's just say, yeah, let's just do it like this, right? So we have this subscriber listening to this event, right, on key pressed, and then we have the first subscriber listening to the same event as well. So if I run this, right, both subscribers should essentially receive that event and handle it independently, right? So, which is what's happening down here. So we can see that the first subscriber is listening on a key pressed event, and then a key gets pressed and it handles it down here. Then the second subscriber also basically listened to that same event and also got to handle it down here. So we have two different subscribers handling the same event at the same time. Now what happens, now in our engine, we want the ability to prevent any other subscribers from handling a specific event in case that, you know, it gets handled by the first receiver, right? Which is not what's currently happening here. And that's actually a bug because our event system can already handle that. So to fix this, just head over to the event.c file, and here just put a return true, because that's what I actually forgot in the previous video. And once we go back to the main function and we run this, you'll notice that only the first subscriber gets to handle that event. So now we have the first subscriber here handling that event, right? And then we have the second subscriber who's listening to that same event, but they don't get to receive that event because the first subscriber has actually handled that event. But now, what happens if we actually want all the subscribers listening to this specific event to also be able to actually handle that event? All we have to do is, in the callback function, right, we can have, well, in this case we're calling the same callback function, but let's just say we had two different callback functions, right? So I'm going to call this one on key pressed 2, right? And then down here, we're going to just add a 2 at the end. So these two subscribers are listening to the same key event, but both of them are calling two different callbacks, right? So let's just say that this first subscriber will receive the event first, right? But we don't want him to prevent the other subscriber from receiving that event too. So what we do is we just, instead of returning true, we return false to indicate that yes, we've handled it, but we don't want it to affect the other listeners, right? So that's basically what we mean by this false key, right? So now when I run this program again, right, you'll notice now that we have the first subscriber receiving the event, then handling it, right? Then we have the second subscriber also receiving the event and handling it as well. But if we only wanted whoever receives the event first to handle it and not pass it to other subscribers, we just simply return true like we've been doing before. And once we do this, you'll notice that the first receiver, the first subscriber, receives the event and handles it, but the second subscriber doesn't, right? So so we can basically control how events get handled and who they get passed on to after being handled by whatever specific subscriber is essentially subscribed to that event. All right, so so we fixed that small little bug, and now we can actually move on to basically setting up our input system. So to do that, let's create two new functions, two new files. One will be called input.h, and then the other one will be called input.c, right, which will be the implementation file. So we want to do that inside the core folder here. So I'll just say new file, and then just create a new C file, and I'm gonna call this input. Okay, so and then just click that. It should also just create a header file for you, and then click next and next. And once you're here, we can start implementing our input system. So we actually we need to be in the header file. So our input system, right, should basically be able to handle key presses and mouse movement and mouse scroll wheels, right? And then in the future, we might add other functionalities such as key mappings and all of that good stuff, right? But for now, we'll just handle the basics. So let's start off with that. So let's start up with our input system. So we're going to say input system / initialize, like so. And then we're also going to have an input system shutdown function to basically free memory if we have any and all of that good stuff, right? And then we want our input system to be able to handle key presses, right? So we're going to have a boolean here, and we're going to call that input is key down, right? And then this one is going to have a friend called input is key up, right? And then we are essentially, before I actually move on with this, we're basically going to see if a specific key has been pressed in this instance. So we need to basically get reference to our keys enum, which we have in our input types. So we'll have to basically include that in here. And I noticed that it's in the platform folder, which it shouldn't necessarily be in there. But for now, I'll just leave it in there because I don't know what else is actually using it, and it will require me to actually refactor all those files, even though we don't really have a lot of files. But I don't want to deal with it for now. So let's just say input. Let's just say include platform / input types.h, like so. Platform types not found. Hey, what do you mean not found? Oh, I have to do this, I guess. Then I say platform, then I say input types.h. Right, okay, fine. And now you'll see that this error goes away. And if you're curious what this is, let me just navigate to that. And it's just essentially an enum that has our keys for the Mac platform. It's Mac specific because our engine will be a Mac based engine, and it will remain one for the longest being. Actually, I don't really have plans to make this a cross-platform engine, mainly because we already have other good engines out there that are working on Windows, and I just want to make, something for the Mac, and for those guys who actually want to be working on Macs to actually be able to do cool stuff too, right? So back into the input.header file here, we just want that specific key to check if it's been pressed, and then here we're going to check if whatever key gets passed through here is actually not pressed, right? It's not down, it's up. Right? And then a pretty cool thing about the input system is that all the functions are pretty sweet and short and pretty much self-explanatory. So we have input is key down, input is key up, but then we also want to check the previous state. So we want to check if a key was down and if a key was up, and then from there we also want to basically have a function to then process the input key, right? So we're gonna have a void input process key function. This will actually trigger, or well, it will actually give a key state, whether it's pressed or unpressed, right? So in that case, we're going to pass in that specific key. So, and then we're going to indicate if that key is pressed or not. Okay, so it will just do some processing on that key. And then we're going to have functions for the mouse. So we're going to do a boolean, and then we're going to say input mouse is mouse down, just the same way we did for the keys. We're gonna do for the mouse. So is mouse down, and for the mouse we are essentially gonna have to check if the mouse buttons have been clicked, and I do know that we don't really have an enum for the mouse buttons, so we're gonna have to quickly just add that real quick. So let me just do that. So let's navigate down to our input types here, and we're gonna create an enum for the mouse buttons, right? So let's do a type def enum, and then in here we're just gonna say we're gonna call this enum mouse buttons like this, and then let's just make it a plural. So let's add that s there, and then close off the enum like so, and then we basically have an empty enum and we don't want it empty, so let's say mouse button left, and then mouse, let's just copy this a couple of times, mouse button left, mouse button middle, and then mouse button right, and then we just want like max mouse buttons, in case we end up using this in some form of an array. So this one will be at indexes 0, 1, 2, 3, right? Essentially, so you can be explicit about it if you want. I guess you can, and then you can just indicate that these are just integers, I guess, right? And once we have this, we can come back down to our input.h, and then we can just say mouse buttons, and then we can just say that specific button to check if that specific button is actually currently down or not, and we want to put that right there. And I'm just going to duplicate this and say is mouse button up to check if it has been released, and then we want to do was mouse button down and was mouse button up, the same way we're doing for a normal key press, right? So all I'll do is just duplicate this and paste it down here, and instead of is, we just say was, like so. Okay, and these basically the signatures stay the same, right? And then we want another boolean down here, which will then be for drag support. We want to support dragging, mouse dragging, so we're going to say input, and then we're going to say is mouse dragging, and then we're just gonna say mouse button is mouse button dragging. So we're gonna check if the current mouse button is pressed and whether it is moving. So then we know that we are essentially dragging, and I don't know why I keep on opening these guys here. But then yeah, so input is mouse button dragging, and then we need another mouse related function here. So we're gonna say void input get mouse position, you can leave it like this, but I just want to I like being a little bit more specific, explicit with my function names, so I'm gonna keep it like this. So input get mouse position, and all this is gonna return is all this is gonna do is essentially set the mouse position to whatever whatever it's gonna give us the mouse positions, I mean, right? And we're gonna do that by basically having an I. Wait, let me do I want an I? Yeah, let's do an I16. I16, and then I just want this to be a pointer because we're not really returning, so we're just gonna be setting, right, the values. So yeah, so I16 and then another I16 for the Y position, and this needs to be a pointer like so. And yeah, I was basically curious about that I16, whether or not we're actually including our defines. And I also noticed that our defines file is also in the platform folder, which should also be removed. But again, there's a lot of things that are actually listening or actually using that defines file, so I'll just leave it in there for now, but in the future it will definitely be moved out of there. So yeah, so now we have the ability to get the mouse position. What we want to do also is get the previous mouse position, so put.get previous mouse position, and the signature stays the same. And then all we have to do next is also process the mouse button the same way we're processing the mouse the key, right, the keyboard keys. So we're gonna say void input process mouse button like this, and then all we're gonna do is just gonna have a mouse button, and then whether or not that button is pressed or not. So pressed. All right, so once we basically have the input process mouse button, we also need to basically process the mouse movement and the mouse move. So we're gonna have a void input process process mouse move. This will basically, we will actually call this when we move in the mouse, right? So that we can get the exact coordinates of the mouse at that specific point in time. So X, these ones will not be pointers, Y, and that should be an I16. So once we have this, we are done here. Then we also need one for the mouse wheel, because we're going to be enabling that as well, that feature. It's not really a feature, but you know. So mouse wheel, the delta is very small number, so I think it's like between 0 and 1, or we can confine it between 0 and 1 depending on how you want to deal with the precision and everything. But yeah, so I'm gonna call this delta Z. Okay, and then we also want our input system to basically parse our keys, because we get our keys in terms of numbers, right? So we have like 13, 14, 18, 37 or whatever, right? But we don't want to deal with numbers. We actually want the actual value, or what it actually maps to. In this case, I know that 0 probably maps to the key A, so we want to know that, right? We want to return the name of that specific key. So we're gonna have a constr, right, function called input key code to string. Okay, so yeah, then we're just gonna give it the key that we want to basically get the string of, and again, that's about it. And I think with all of this, we have just about the functionality that we want to support for now. So all I'll do is just copy all of these functions in hopes that I actually did everything correctly. And before I do that, actually this one needs to be a boolean to initialize, and then the rest should basically be fine. So let me see. Yeah, any issues, we'll deal with them in the future. So go to our c.file and paste all these here. And I'm just gonna run this to see if we broke anything, and nothing broke, so it's cool. Right, so now we want to essentially set up our um our mouse state and our keyboard state, right, and our input system state. So right, so the way we're gonna do this is gonna be inspired by another open source engine, by I guess oh yeah, his name is actually Travis Froman. Hopefully I am pronouncing that correctly. He's also building his own game engine. It's open source, you guys can check it out. It's called the Kohi game engine, and he's a very brilliant guy actually. And actually my game engine builds upon heavily on his resources and his teachings on how to do these things. So definitely check out his channel, because he's pretty cool, and all of this is actually inspired by him as well. And I believe I would have had a pretty tough time doing this without having gone through some of his videos and all of that stuff. So yeah, just wanted to put that out there and also give credit where it's due. So it's going to be inspired by his implementation as well. So yeah, so let's do a type def struct, and then we're going to say keyboard state. So we're going to have a keyboard state because we want to keep track of what key is currently being pressed, right? So we're going to have a boolean here, and then we're going to have keys because we want to keep track of how many keys have been pressed. And at this point, if you look at our input types here, we currently don't know how many keys we have. Now we could just say max max keys, something like this here. That's why I left it out, because at this point I just don't know how many keys I have and how many I'm actually missing, because for sure I'm not really supporting all of them yet. I know for a fact I still need to support keys like the grave, tilde, and all the other keys, brackets, square brackets, all of that stuff, which we don't currently have at the moment. So we could put a max key here and then have this thing do its magic. But now the problem is we've given these guys values here. So I don't know if technically it will still count from 0 all the way to whatever this key is, and then give us +1 here. So I'm not gonna do that, and instead I'm just gonna resort to giving this a hard-coded value. So I'm gonna just say 256 for now, right? That could be more than the keys we currently have, but it's okay, it's whatever, right? But I'm just gonna leave it there because for sure I know that we don't have all the keys yet supported in the engine. So yeah, that will be fine for now. And then let's just take this here, and then let's put this down here. And then the other thing that I want to do now is create a type def struct for the mouse state, because this one's for the keyboard state, so we want one for the mouse state. So type def struct mouse state, like so. And then once we have the mouse state, let's close the struct down here. And then the mouse state, obviously, what does a mouse basically have? It has position and buttons, right? So we're gonna have an I16 for the X position, and then an I16 for the Y position, and then we're gonna have the state of which button is actually currently active, right? So we're just gonna have like a table there, and then this one will be max mouse buttons, and then the other one will be whether or not the current button clicked is actually dragging. So if you have the left mouse button held down and we're actually moving the mouse at the same time, that counts as a drag. So we also want to keep track of that, right? And then once we have this, then we actually pretty much almost there, right? So all we need to then do is set up our input system state. So to do that, let's do another type def struct here. And then you're gonna have it's gonna be called an input system state, like this. And I'm gonna put this down here like so. And from there, all I'm gonna do now is basically keep track of what the keyboard state is and what the mouse state is. So all I'm gonna do is say keyboard state, and then I'm gonna say keyboard current, which will then keep state of the current buttons being pressed. And then we're gonna have another one which will keep track of the previous buttons being pressed, right? That were pressed essentially, right? And we're gonna do the same for the mouse. So it's gonna be mouse state, and then this one will be mouse current, and the other one will be mouse previous. All right, like so. Then we want to basically have a functionality to allow repeated keys, but we can toggle that on or off, right? So we can say repeated keys enabled, or we can say key repeats enabled, right? And then we can toggle that on or off as we choose, right? So once we have this state here, we basically want to have a static global state for our input system. So input system, and then we're going to turn this into a pointer, and then we're going to have I for internal. Then we know that this is internal to this file. That's why I just always put the I in front. And then all we have to do is allocate memory for that, and we'll do that in the initialization of the input system itself. So to initialize this system, you're going to basically check if I state is currently already initialized, and if it has been initialized, we don't do anything, right? Or we can check if it's not initialized, rather, and if it's not initialized, then we basically allocate memory for that guy. Yeah, so I think that's the better way of doing it. So let's do an input. Let's malloc this, and I don't have that in here, so let's do std. Did I misspell this? Include std lib. Yeah, I think it's in there. So we're gonna malloc, right, this to be the size of the input system state. So just like that, we good. But I actually just want to cast this to this just to be extra safe, right? We can never be too sure lately. So yeah, that's that. And then we're gonna return true down here. Okay, so if the state has not been initialized, we initialize it, right? Otherwise, we can do whatever it is that we want to do here. So we're going to say print f here, and we're going to say input system initialized, right? Like so. Well, let's actually put this in here, because if it's not initialized, we initialize it, and then we do this, right? And then we return true. I think that's fine. And then the other thing that we can do is, yeah, I'm just gonna do this for now. Keep key repeats enabled, and I'm gonna set that to false. Okay. Because we wanna basically make that configurable at some point. Or enable it in different parts of the engine. So yeah, for now I'm just gonna set its default value to false. And then input system shutdown. In here we really don't have to do anything for now, so I'm just gonna say I state equals to 0, which is gonna reset everything. But essentially I might just want to free the memory, so yeah, let's just say free I state like this, and then set it to 0, or to be extra, let's just set it to null. Right? Yeah, and then let's do the easy functions first, right? So let's start off with these guys, and I say easy because honestly speaking, they are very easy. There's really nothing to do in these functions. So let's do a sanity check to check that we do have a valid internal state set up, and if it's not, so let's just say if it's not initialized, then we just return false. So return false, but if it is, then all we're gonna do is return, right? Because we're asking, is the key down, right? So all we have to do is then say I state keyboard current dot keys. Then we basically gonna get that specific key, and we're gonna check if it's actually down or not, right? So essentially just saying, hey, check if this key, right, is currently down, right? Check if it's currently down, because it's down, then it's true, right? If it's down, then it's true. If it's not, it's false. And so we can just simply copy this and paste it in here, and instead of returning true here, return false, right? Is key up, because if it's not down, it's up, right? So that's how you do that. And then we're gonna do the same for was key up, was key down. So these are super simple, and you do them the same way that we're doing these ones here. So I'm just gonna copy paste, because there is no need for us to do anything else. So we're just gonna rename current to previous, because it's in the past tense. So that's what we want to do there. And then instead of returning false here, we return true. Then I'm gonna copy this, paste it up here, and instead of returning true here, return false. So that's that, right? I'm gonna skip this one because it's a little bit long, and then I'm gonna go down to the mouse button ones, because they are similar to the key ones that we did above there. So all I'm gonna do is again copy this function, paste it down here, and instead of keyboard, right, I'm gonna say mouse current, and then instead of keys, we're gonna say buttons, right? And then we're just gonna pass in the button that we want to check whether it's down or not, right? So in this case, we want to check if it's down. So check if it's down, and here we want to check if it's up. So instead of returning true, we return false. Okay, sweet. Then same story over here, right? These functions are simply simple, so you cannot really go wrong here. So yeah, an input system is really not that complicated. So yeah, so was mouse button down, so instead of the current one, we say previous, because we're in the past tense. So, and instead of false here, we return true. Just always check if you're returning the correct thing. And then up means that we are currently not pressed, and that's about it, right? So dragging is the same situationship. So just open this up, paste that in here, and instead of buttons, all you have to say is dragging. And because this is in current, this is current, so we're gonna say is mouse dragging, current dragging. All we have to do here is just say button, like so, and that's about it, right? So we're just checking if that button is currently being held down and is currently being dragged around and stuff. So yeah, that's about it. All we have to then do, let me see, what other functions do we have? We have mouse position, mouse previous position. I guess we can also do these ones because they are simple enough. So here we're gonna check if the internal state has been basically allocated. So I state, and then all we have to do, because we want to set these values here, so we need to dereference them by putting a point in front of them and then just setting them to whatever it is that we want to set them. For now, we're just going to set them to 0, because the state itself is not initialized, and then all you're gonna do here is just return, right? But if it is initialized, instead of setting them to 0, we want to set them to whatever the coordinates is, and we're gonna do that by getting it from the state. So we're gonna say istate mouse current dot x. So we're gonna get the current x position, and then just copy this little function statement, and then get the y position there, right? Pretty simple, isn't it? And then for the previous one, we do exactly the same thing. Just copy this, paste it down here, and instead of mouse current, all you're gonna say is mouse previous, and then do the same one for the y coordinate, and you basically, we almost there, right? And then all that's left for us to then do is to check if the mouse button is basically pressed or not, and also basically check if the mouse button is actually process the mouse movement and the mouse wheel. So in this case, for the mouse wheel, I think we will not implement that one just yet. So I'm just gonna open it and not do anything in there. And then the mouse wheel, not the mouse wheel, the mouse movement. Okay, I don't know. Mouse movement, mouse input key toString. For this one, actually, this one we're not really gonna code from scratch. I already have a function from my previous engine, so I'm just gonna open that up in there. So let's do this. It should be, yeah, here it is. So let's just take this from here and then copy this and just paste it up here to see if we actually spelled it the same, and yes, we did. Okay, so that's about that. Yeah, so that function basically just returns the string for that specific key. So key enter will give us a string that says enter, key tab will be tab, caps lock, escape. So that's all that this does essentially. And for any other key that we currently don't have supported yet, we just return an undefined key. So let's just let's just say undefined key, just to be a little bit explicit there. Yeah, and then we're only left with these two functions, mouse button and mouse move. But I think I'll just do the process key. Where are you? Here it is. So let's start with the process key first. Let's process keyboard keys first, right? So because I feel like this one is the shortest of them all, yeah, between the ones that are left that are not implemented, between these two guys. So yeah, let's start with this one. Here we want to do a sanity check, so I'm just gonna copy this one here like so, and then all we have to do is then put in our logic, right? So I'm gonna say bool is repeat, so we're gonna check if the key is repeating, right? So is repeat. Wait, how do you spell repeat? Boolean, yeah, like this. So is repeat, and we're gonna basically check if it's pressed, right? So if it's pressed, and then we're gonna look into our state here, and I'm gonna say keyboard current dot keys, then that specific key. So let's say key. So if this key, right, is pressed, right, then all we have to do is essentially do this. Yeah, so we're checking if it's pressed, and we're checking if that current key is also being pressed, right? And I think I'm doing this incorrectly. Like, is repeat, why is it saying if pressed and I state keyboard current dot keys key is repeat pressed, I state current key. Oh, yeah, okay, yeah, okay. No, I understand. Yeah, it actually is correct. So then we're gonna say bool changed equals to state. Then we're gonna say keyboard current dot keys. We're gonna check that current key and see if it's not pressed. Yeah, so our logic above is actually correct. So yeah, okay. we're gonna check if the current key being pressed is not pressed. And then all we're gonna do is basically do an if statement here to check is state, I state, check I state. Why am I, yeah, I state. We're gonna check keyboard, if the key repeats are enabled, right, or changed, right, because we're getting it from here, right? Then basically, if the key that we're currently pressing is not the same as the key that we previously pressed, we want to basically update our keyboard state, right? So we're gonna say I state here, then we're gonna say keyboard current dot keys, that specific key, and then we want to change it to be pressed, right? So if this key has not been pressed before, right, meaning this is what we basically mean by this. If it has not been pressed before, or the state basically doesn't really match what it is currently, right, meaning that it's not a key press, it's not a repeated key, then basically it means that it's a different key, and therefore we basically want to set the state to that key, to whatever the state is here, whether it's pressed or not pressed, right? Yeah, again, I'm not really the best explainer, but anyways, let me just put a comment here, update state, right? So yeah, and then from there, that's actually all we have to do, really, for now. Return false, can't return false there, so we just return, and actually this puts us at a point where we can actually make use of an event system. Yeah, because yeah, we can actually make use of an event system. So up here, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say include, we're gonna make use of an event system. So let's do event.h. Okay, save that bad boy. So every time a key is being pressed or released, right, we want to fire an event, right? So in this loop, we basically check in if a key has been pressed or is basically released or whatever, right? And every time we check for that, and every time we update, we want to basically fire some sort of event, right? And then any subscriber listening to that event can then basically handle that event however they want to handle that event, right? So let's just do that. So let's say event data. This is the data that we're going to basically send to the event system, to the subscribers basically subscribing to this event that we're going to send out, right? So we're going to say event data, and then I'm going to call this event data like so, right? And then I'm going to say event data dot data. Then we want to basically store, or basically, yeah, we want to basically store some data to pass through to the subscribers, right? So in this case, this is a key press, so I'm going to store that in a U16, and then I'm going to basically store the key being pressed. So the key being pressed, I'm going to store it in this U16. And if you're not familiar with the event system again, so let's just go down to event data to see what's happening here. So our U16 is here, right? And currently it basically has 8 positions in it, right? It's an array. So we're using the first position in this instance, right? And we're storing the key that's currently being pressed or released. And then we also want to basically send over whether the key is a repeating key or not. So let's do U16, and then let's do 1 here in the array, and then we're gonna say basically is repeat. Right, then we're gonna say if it is a repeat, we're just gonna store 1 in there. If it's not, we're gonna store 0 in there, right? And then from here, we're basically ready to publish our event. Okay, now the input system assumes that event system has already been initialized, so the event system should always be initialized right after the event system because of what we're doing here. So yeah, so now let's just say event dot publish, and then we want to publish an event of type key pressed because this is a key press event. So event code key pressed. Then all we have to do, actually, instead of doing this because what's happening in this while loop is we're checking if the state is not the same as the previous state, meaning that we're basically checking whether it's basically pressed or not, right? So what we can do here, we can say if is pressed, right? Then we say we want to fire an event called key pressed, a key press event, and then if it's not pressed, then we want to fire a key, an event code key released event, right? And we don't have that yet, so let me just go to our event.h, and then in here we can say key released, right? And like so now we have an event code for when the key is released, an event code for when the key is pressed. So back into our input system, so if the key is not pressed, then essentially we just want to fire an event whereby we say that the key has been released instead. All right, and then once we're done there, the sender in this instance is the input system, but for this we can just pass in 0 here, right? Yeah, so I'm just gonna pass in 0 in there, and then the data that we want to pass through is the event data, which is this data here, whereby we're passing in the currently key, the key, and whether the key is repeating or not, and then we just gonna basically say we're basically just gonna fire an event that says whether the key has been pressed or released, based on whether the key is pressed or released, I mean. So yeah, let's test this out because I feel like it is testable. So let's go down to our main.c file. Here where we basically initializing our event system, we want to initialize our input system. Now we don't have our input system up here, so I'm just gonna duplicate this and then change this into input.h. Then down here we're gonna say input system initialize, like this, and then we basically have our input system initialized, and then down here right before we basically destroy our event system, we're gonna say input system shutdown, like so. And with that, we've basically initialized our input system, right? And if I run this, right, yeah, if I run this and I press any other key on my keyboard, you'll see that nothing is being printed out to the console, right? Given that even though we have this subscribers basically subscribing to that event, that's because our input system has not been hooked to anything yet. So our platform layer is not basically, using the input system. So let's basically do that. So let's go down to our platform macOS layer, and we want to go to our content view implementation up here where we have all of these to-dos, right? This is where our input system is going to be placed or basically made use of. So in this case, we want to basically process key presses. So in here where it says key down and key up, this is where we want to call input process key, right? So we don't have input yet, so let's do that. So let's import, and it's outside and it's in the core and it's in input.h, like so. So then when we go back down here where it says key down, all you have to say is input process key, and then the key that's being basically pressed or is basically pressed because this is key down, comes from the event, right, being given to us by the operating system, and we just say key code, right? Or you could just do something like this: an int key equals to event key code, like so. And then instead of putting this here, you just say key, and then whether it's pressed or not. And in this case, we do know that it's pressed, so we can say true, like this, because this is on key down, meaning that the key is pressed, so therefore we can do it like this, right? So yeah, then I'm just gonna duplicate this, paste it down here, and instead of it being pressed, it's going to be released, so like so. And if I run this, hopefully everything should work. like this. And down here you'll notice that it says input system initialized, key press is 13. So if I now press A, for instance, you'll notice that it's going to say key pressed is 0 because 0 is A. So if I press Q, it's going to say key pressed is 12 because 12 maps to Q. Now if you still don't believe me, I actually don't have that opened, so let's do macOS keyboard layout, I guess. Keyboard keys layout. I forgot what it was. Where did I get that? Yeah, now I won't remember. No, keyboard key codes. I think key codes. macOS keyboard key. Yeah, here we go. This is what I'm looking for. Right, so Q is 12, right? If you guys take a look at this, right? Q is 12, and then A is 0, so W is 13. So I'm gonna click on W, and then we should get 13 printed out, and yes, we do. So our input system and event system is actually working. So what's happening? So the operating system is listening on key for key down, right? So when we basically press a key, right, the operating system receives that event, and then we basically taking that event key code and then passing it on to our input system, and then our input system on process key essentially checks if that key that we pass in is currently pressed, right? And then if it's currently pressed or released, which is what this if statement is saying okay, fine, if it's pressed, fire a key press event, right? But if it's not pressed and it's different than its previous state or whatever, then essentially all we want to do is fire a key released, right, event, and that's about it, right? So that's how the flow is essentially working here, right? So we're basically taking input from the operating system and then passing it into the input system, and then the input system passes that off onto the event system, and then the event system basically sends it off to the subscribers on our application here to then basically handle that key pressed, which is this on key pressed callback that we have over here for those key pressed events, right? Yeah, and notice that we're only having key press 13 called once, even though we have 2 subscribers to on key pressed. And the reason again why I said it will only get called once is because we're saying here we want to handle it, but then we also don't want other subscribers to receive this event. So if I turn this to false here, right, we will still handle it for ourselves, but then we still want other people or other subscribers to handle that same event on their own as well. So when I do that now, you'll notice that when I press on key 13, which is W, it'll get called twice. So if I click on W now, you'll notice that it's getting printed out twice, right? That's because we have 2 subscribers listening to on key presses. Make sense? Sweet. Now let's go back to the input system because we're still not done yet. So we've implemented keyboard presses, right? But now we need to basically handle our mouse related buttons and movements. So let's basically do that. So let's do the mouse button. Okay, so let's open this bad boy, and then input process mouse. So I just want to do a sanity check. Let me see, and I'm gonna do it like this: input process mouse. Where are you? Right here. So if our internal state is not initialized, we just boot out of this function and do nothing. Yeah, okay, sweet. So now let's check. So we're gonna see. So we're gonna say if I state, then we're gonna check mouse current dot buttons / we want that button, and we're gonna check if this button is not pressed, right? So if this button is not pressed, right, then inside here we're gonna do another, well, yeah, no, actually we are checking if it's not pressed, right? So if it's not pressed, then we're going to say iState, right? And then we're going to do mouse current dot buttons slash we want that button, right, being passed through, and then we want to set it to pressed, right? Now pressed can be pressed meaning it's true or it's false, right? So if the state of the current button being pressed does not match the state being passed through, we then set it to equals to that state being pressed through. So the state can either be pressed, so if this is not pressed, then we basically set it to pressed, right? Or it can be not pressed, and then if this is not pressed, then we basically set it to, and this is pressed, yeah, then we set it to pressed, not pressed. You know what? I should stop talking. You get it. Yeah, you guys are not stupid, right? Cause yeah, I explained it correctly the first time. Now I'm messing it up, right? so now with the same notion of what we did up here, right? We can just simply just copy this event because we also want to post an event. So what's happening, right? So we're basically checking if the state changed, then we publish an event, right? In this case, if the button is pressed, then we're gonna basically fire an event which says mouse pressed, right? And then this one will essentially just say mouse released. All right, now mouse press, mouse release doesn't really make much sense to me, so I need to put button here. So mouse button pressed and mouse button released, and we don't have this in our event key codes list, so we're basically just gonna add this in here, right? So we're gonna have one for mouse pressed, and we should have one for mouse released, like so. Then back into our input system and save. Then we basically see that being highlighted there. So what data do we want to pass through when the mouse is pressed? So first and foremost, we want to pass through the button that's being clicked or released, right? Then we also want to basically pass through whether the not the button, whether the button, we also want to pass through the mouse position, I mean, to whatever subscriber is subscribing to the mouse being clicked or released, right? So I'm just going to duplicate this, and then I'm going to set this one to 2 because we want to pass in the x and y coordinates. So I'm just going to do a multi-line select. Oh my goodness. Yeah, I'm just going to do a multi-line select here, and then I'm going to say iState slash mouse current, and all I want to do is get the positions, right? So I'm going to say x, close that off, and then just turn this one into a y, like so. So essentially this is the data that we're passing through with our event whenever the mouse is clicked or released, okay? And then we basically fire that event with that data that we want to pass through. So before we test this, we need to come back to our platform layer, and then we need to look for mouse down and mouse up, and all we have to do here is just say input process mouse button, and then the mouse button being clicked. For now, I know that this refers to the left mouse button, so I'm just gonna say mouse button left, and then down means true, so we're gonna say yes, it is clicked, it is pressed. And then here we can just copy this and paste it in here, and then up means false, so I'm just gonna pass in false there. The reason why I'm saying it's mouse button left is because macOS, the operating system, has another one here that says right mouse up, right mouse down. So this one is explicit. We are not handling this yet, but I guess you could, right? So yeah, I guess you could, but for now I'll just deal with the left mouse button, but you can extend it and add support for that as well. In fact, you know what, let's just add it. Why not? I don't like doing things half-half because I might need it in the future. So let's do right mouse down, and then we do right mouse up, like so, and then just copy this, paste it in there, and we can get rid of this to do handles. Actually, in fact, we're just gonna leave that because we actually not quite done with our input system, especially on the Mac platform layer just yet, because the way we're calling, we don't want to call the input system directly, but we're just doing so for now just to test things around. In future, we're not really gonna call the input process mouse button directly, right? We're gonna have callbacks and we're gonna register events and all of that stuff, functions and so forth, right? But yeah, okay, so process mouse button, and instead of being the left, this is gonna be right, and then instead of this being left, it's also gonna be right, and then down means true, and then up means false, right? Yeah. And I actually want to keep the same order that I have up there. So we say mouse up, mouse down. So here I'm going to have right mouse up, then I'm going to have right mouse down, like so. And what's this? Oh, the T. So from there, we basically have that. And hopefully, if I did everything correctly, if I click now, well, I'm clicking, nothing is happening. So let's see. Did I do something? Input process mouse button, event code mouse button pressed, and code mouse button released. Are we not listening for mouse pressed? Oh, we're listening for mouse move. Interesting. So instead of mouse moved, I'm gonna say mouse button pressed. Okay. And then instead of mouse moved, I'm gonna create another callback up here, and then it's gonna be on mouse button down, something like this, right? Just copy this. So mouse button press, that will call the on mouse button down callback, and it should say left mouse down, right? Something like that. Actually, we don't know if it's the left mouse button or the right mouse button. So this is where our data comes through, right? So in our input system, we're passing in the mouse button, right? That specific mouse button. So what we could do is in here, we can check, right? We can check. So if data.u16, and I believe we're passing in the button being clicked on the first, yeah, we are. So then I can say if that is equals to mouse button left, then we want to print out that, hey, left mouse button down, right? And all I want to do is left mouse button down. Oh, we can add some extra logic here. We can check if it's been yeah, okay, now we do know that it's down, so there's no need for us to complicate this any further, because we do have another key code that's listening for released, so we can basically do that in a different callback, so it's fine. So then we know that the mouse button is down, so therefore we don't really have to pass any of this data. So save this. Hopefully we are then going to basically have the event propagated down here. So yes, so when I click, I'm going to click again. You can see left mouse down, right? See that? So we basically have that. However, we can also check if the right mouse button has been clicked. So I'm going to duplicate this, then do this, and say if it's right, then do something, right? Hold on, we need to fix this. It should say right mouse down, so let's test that. Right mouse down, beautiful, look at that. So we can basically test if the left mouse button is clicked. So I just click my left mouse button and it says left mouse down. Then if I click my right mouse button, it's gonna say right mouse down. So our event system, input system, is currently propagating all of our events properly. And then what is left? The only thing that is left right now is to handle drags and releases. but I feel like I've been going on for too long in this video. So you know what, again, I really don't want to do things half-half, so let's just finish this. Yeah, let's just finish this so that the next video I make will be about something else. So yeah, so we handle, yeah, let me just put comments here so that we don't get confused. So what are we doing? So yeah, let's say if the state changed, then publish an event. Okay. And then down here we can basically just handle drag releases, if any. Yeah, because we basically gonna add support for dragging, but the dragging logic does not get handled in here. It gets handled in the mouse movement. So this just checks if a mouse is being released. So if a mouse is being released, then we basically also want to basically stop any drag operation that is currently active. So yeah, so we're just gonna have an if statement that asks if the current button is pressed. So if it's not pressed, then basically we want to update the state and move it out of the dragging situation. But to do that, we need to check that yes, the current button is or not dragging, right? But if the mouse button is dragging, so we're gonna look that up in the dragging array, and we're going to say, okay, fine. So if this button is not pressed and if it's currently dragging, then essentially all we want to do is say it's no longer dragging. So we're going to say I state, then we're going to say mouse, sorry about that, mouse current dragging, then that button that we want, and then we're just going to say it's not dragging anymore. Okay, and then we also just want to publish an event. So these are all simple. So for this one, we need to add another event code here. So let's do event code mouse drag, because we want to end the dragging. And then I think we might just want to basically have another one for begin dragging and stuff like that, but we'll do it when we get to that part. So I'll just leave this one like this, but then I will also have another event that I know that I might need, which will be pressed, and then the other one will be mouse button clicked, right? So yeah, mouse button clicked. So mouse button clicked, meaning it was literally just up and down, right? Real quick. Yeah, something like that. Mouse button clicked. Okay, so when we basically undragging, we're basically ending a drag operation. So we want to fire an event that basically tells the listeners or subscribers that, hey, we are no longer dragging anymore. So event code mouse drag end. Okay, something like this, and then we just pass in the data, and yeah, I think I'm gonna keep it like this, right? So in this case, we still passing in that button, and the X and Y positions. Okay. I'm gonna leave it like this. Then what else do we want to do? Else, because we check in if it was a drag, if we were still dragging, then we want to undrag, right? But if we were not dragging, then it's just a normal mouse released event, right? Yeah, right. So, but we don't register it as one, because here we're already handling the released state, and here we're already handling the pressed state. So here we're just gonna basically make use of that new event code that we added called clicked. So if it's not a drag release, then it's a normal click. So we're just gonna publish an event here. So I'm gonna just put a comment here. If not a drag operation, then it's a normal click. And we just publish publish a mouse click event. Okay, up here we are basically publishing a mouse drag and event, and that's about it, right? And then this just be mouse button clicked. Sweet. And it should basically just give out the same stuff that we were basically sending in out to the other functions. And yeah, that's how we handle the mouse button. So next we move on to the mouse move. In fact, for the mouse delta, we could just also just send an event here actually. It won't really contain too much stuff, right? Yeah, it won't really contain too much. It will just contain the delta z value, so we can get rid of all of these. And the delta z value is an i8, so let's do an i8, and basically just pass in the delta z value that we're getting from here into this event data we're gonna pass through. And then here we can just say event code mouse wheel. So we're gonna need to go back to our event.h and then just add event code mouse wheel like so. And then back into our input system, we basically have the process mouse wheel function implemented, and that's about it. So we only left with this one actually now, the mouse movement. Now let me just stretch. It's also not really a complicated function, so we could pretty much easily just get through this as well. So I'm gonna do a sanity check once again. If we don't have the input system initialized, then we do nothing. Okay, then what do I want to do? We want to check if the state changed and all of that. Okay, so I'm getting cold. Yeah, but I'm almost done, so let me just push on. So let me say mouse current. We want the X position, and we want to check if that's not currently equals to this new position that we're passing through, right? So if it's not currently equals to that, or state slash mouse current dot y is not equals to the newly passed in position, then all you want to do, then we know, is that the mouse is in a different position than it was previously or currently or whatever. And then we basically just want to update this to actually equals this, right? This x to actually equals that x. So we just update the position. So let's do I state, right? And we say mouse current dot x equals to the new position. Okay, like so. And that's pretty much it, really. Yeah, that's pretty much it. And all we need to do is just pass through the position, through an event call. So I'm gonna get rid of this, and probably want to change this back to 0 and 1 here. And then the position that we want to essentially send off with our event is this newly passed in position. So that'll be X, and this one will be Y. And we're just gonna say mouse button, mouse moved, actually, event code mouse moved. And that should be about it, really. Yeah, that should really just be about it. Yeah, and then all I have to do is, because up here we handle drag releases, if any. So how would we actually even end up in a drag operation in the first place? So we need logic for that. So to do that, we will basically handle dragging operations down here. So to do that, we basically need to check, right? But we need to actually not check, but we need to loop, right, through all the buttons that we have for the mouse. So for int I equals to 0, I less than max mouse buttons, and I plus plus like this. We need to check, right, and see if that current button, right, is currently clicked, right, slash pressed or whatever, right. So I'm gonna do that like this. So let's do check if the current mouse button is pressed, slash down, right. To do that, simply we need to make use of I state, mouse current, buttons, buttons, yeah, for the mouse, and then that current button. So if that current button is pressed, so then we check if the button is not currently then check if the mouse is not currently dragging. Okay, so to do that, we say if I state is not, well, let's do it like this. Mouse current. Do we want current? Because no, we want the previous. So I state mouse previous dot, if it's not dragging, right, then essentially we're just gonna say I. So if it's not dragging, okay, and then we also gonna check if it's also currently not dragging. So if it was not previously dragging and it's currently not dragging, mouse current dot dragging. I made a spelling mistake there. If it's not previously dragging and it's not currently dragging, right, then we want to basically start dragging. So start dragging like so. Yeah, for that specific button. Okay, then we can say I state slash mouse current, we want the current, right, and then we want to say dragging I, and we want to set that to true because now we know that we're dragging. Okay, and then we simply just send an event, and we're gonna take this one up here. So publishing mouse drag event, and all we want to do is simply just pass in the position as we were doing before, and then the current button that's being dragged. So like so. Yeah, the current button that's being pressed will be passed through, and we just want to update our event here to be saying mouse dragged, and I do believe that we don't have an event for that. So pressed, clicked, released. So let's do it up here. Mouse dragged like this, and we have a mouse drag end, and we need a mouse drag begin. So publish a mouse drag event. So essentially we are beginning, so this should be mouse drag begin like this, and that's about it, right? So if we're currently not dragging at all, then we basically want to start a drag operation, right? Else we want to do something else. So else if actually I want to add some spacing between this. Else if, right? So else if I state mouse, come on now, mouse current dot dragging. So we're gonna check if we currently are dragging, right? So here we're checking if we're not currently dragging, but now if we currently are dragging, essentially we just continue, right? So we don't really do anything else. We just continue dragging and just pass through an event again. So yeah, so we just publish a how do you spell continue? continuance of publish a continuance of the drag operation event, something like that. Yeah, English is not my strong suit, but oh well. Let's go forward. And what are we passing through? We're passing in basically the same data we were passing in before. The only difference is the event type. So instead of drag begin, we still dragging, so dragged, right? And that's about it, really. I think now we have our mouse movement, so we can go into actually it's our platform layer, and we need to find mouse moved, which is right here. And mouse moved, we had this code that was commented out, so let's uncomment that, and let's just simply say input process mouse move, and we're basically gonna pass in the position.x from the operating system and position.y of the mouse from the operating system, like so. But I do want you to note something about macOS. macOS coordinates start from, I think it was the left button, right? Yeah, the left button. So we can actually test that real quick and see, because we're not listening for mouse moved events just yet. So we have mouse pressed. Let's change this one to key code mouse moved, and instead of this it will be on mouse moved like this. So we're gonna call this callback here, which will then print out mouse moved, and then it will give us the data or the position of the mouse here. So I think that should be actually it, because we're subscribing to that event, so there's nothing else we should do. So if I move my mouse, nothing is happening. Interesting. Event code mouse moved. I'm subscribing. I'm literally unsubscribing from it. So let's get rid of these here. And in fact, let's just get rid of everything here now, because we do know that the event system is working. So there's no need for us to clutter it with too many stuff. So yeah, we should just have two subscriptions, one for the key press and one for the mouse moved. And it should now work. So I'm gonna move my mouse, and boom. Notice that we're getting different positions in the console. So I'm going to move it again, and you can notice that that is changing, right? So again, the mouse, the coordinate system on macOS starts from here. So this is your 0, point, right? So you can see that now my X and Y positions are at 0, 0. And then if I move up, the Y increases. And if I move down, the Y decreases. But if I move this way, the X increases, right? Because our window size is 600, the window width is 600, but I can still get the mouse position outside the window, which will then be a continuance, and then this will give my width of my screen, which is just my M1 MacBook Air width. So yeah, but yeah, so that's essentially how it works. But we are going to invert the y to actually start from here. So our 0 0 will be up here somehow, right? That's what we want essentially. Okay. For yeah, because x is 0 here but y is not, so we want our y to be 0 up here as well, so that when we go down, y increases, right? And when we go back up, the y decreases, something like that. But we're not going to do that for now, so just to keep in mind that, let me just put a to do here, invert the y. Okay, we'll do this coordinate in a different video once we get to Vulkan related stuff. I could do it now, but I'm tired. So yeah, so we have a simple input system that's working. We can process mouse movement, mouse clicks, and keyboard clicks. Oh, and actually, if I run this before I actually end, if I click on any key, I'm going to click on D, you're going to see key pressed is 2. We don't want that sometimes, so all you can do is in your main, instead of saying key pressed is that or whatever, you can take this, right? Because you know that's the key code. Nah? And then all you have to do is just say input key code to string, and then just pass in that. And it should say the format should be replaced with the S, so just change this to an S there and run this again. So now you'll notice if I press on any key here, so if I press on A, it'll say key pressed is A. Oh my goodness. The mouse movement is going to annoy me, so let's quickly comment that line for the mouse movement. So now if I press on A, then it's going to say key pressed is A. If I press on W, key press is W. If I press on Q, key press is Q, F, and so forth, right? And the only keys that I know that are still not supported is probably like the grave key. So it will give you like an undefined key, and then most probably my other keys are still not defined, such as my bracket key, my left bracket key, my quotation, my period, my comma. So those are still not being translated properly yet. But yeah, that's what you could do essentially to get the current key being pressed rather than having to see the key code every single time. So yeah, I'm gonna end it here for this video. In the next video, I don't know if I really want to add this feature, but I don't know, but I think I will. The feature that we're going to work on is key mapping, right? We have now a key input system, an input system, but because we know that we're going to basically create games and stuff and all of that with this engine, we need an ability to basically map certain keys to certain callback functions or whatever, right? So we're going to add a key map feature to our input system. So it's a feature, it's not really required, but we might just tackle that in the next video. So yeah, stay tuned for that. And I'll see you guys on the next one. And again, if you guys enjoyed this video, do hit that like and subscribe button. This will definitely help me a lot. And do take care. Cheers.